What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, but here hosting another epic event. This is being brought in part with the Dream Legacy Foundation. The Dream Legacy Foundation is leading and partnering with other social and private partners to build and strengthen Black Canadians' infrastructure in the areas of convening conversations, economic self-empowerment, affordable housing, wealth creation, health research, financial literacy, and Black youth entrepreneurship. Its founder, Isaac Alawalfe Jr., is a proud and action-oriented Black Canadian wealth creator. He's recognized and celebrated as a business magnate in the world of real assets development and ventures management. Just Google up Dreammakers Inc. and you'll find out more information. The Dreammakers Foundation boasts an executive director and a board team with over 100 years of national Black community services at every level. The entire team believes that the UN Decade of Population is a key vehicle for nudging, or if we have to push for the Canada we want for our children and for our aging elders. There is a noise going on here somewhere. Okay, I think it's gone now. All right. So we got that out of the way. So we are blessed to have two people for our conversation today. Now, we were supposed to have Selena Saval-Chavans and Greg Fergus. Selena, unfortunately, something has come up, an emergency, so she will not be able to be part of the conversation today. And it looks like our other guest is trying to get in. Greg Fergus is with us. All right, Greg, how are you? Hello, Greg, how are you? Can we hear you?
Greg can't hear you.
Greg, can you hear us?
I don't know.
Greg, again. Okay, what's that?
All right.
Greg, we can hear you. Greg, can you hear us? No.
Clearly not. Okay, one second. I'm gonna put a sign up saying we can. So he can.
Yeah, let me write one up there.
I'm gonna ask him. Right, was it?
He's looking like he's typing a message.
All right, movement in the back. All right. So we're just having a little bit of a technical challenge right now. We're looking to get Greg Fergus with us. We can hear him, but I don't know if he can hear us. Okay, you know what?
Look up, Greg. Look up.
No, just wait. He'll look in the camera in just a moment. Okay, we're just going to continue on and see if we. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to. He's not. I don't think his camera's working because.
Okay, maybe. So he's looking at something.
Hello, Greg. Can you hear
us? Can anyone hear me?
Yes. Yes. Can you hear us, Greg?
I'm afraid I can't hear you. I have the volume up on full.
Okay.
Can you hear us? Can you hear me,
yes.
though? Yeah. Oh, I see. You said yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's. Okay. Try.
Could you even be? How do you? I don't know. Even be. I wouldn't even know how to mute you guys. I can hear you, but
we'll try refreshing our screen.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have him refresh his screen and see if that works. All right. So while they're having the technical working, okay, good. So we're gonna get going here. So Robin, could you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Certainly. I'm Robin Brown. I'm a federal public servant here in Ottawa. I'm also a co-founder of the Federal Black Employees Caucus, which is a Black employees group that does work around equity and employment in the federal government, and a co-founder and co-lead of the 613-819 Black Hub, which is like an Ottawa, Black community advocacy group.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I forgot if I'm going to say it, Doug Minter. I think I introduced him, but I'll introduce him again because of all the technical challenges we've been having. Doug Minter, Chamber of Development Consultant for the Black Canadian Chamber of Commerce from Knoxville, Tennessee, who's now living in Brampton, Ontario. Doug, thank you for taking the time.
Yes, thank you so much. It's an honor.
Excellent. So the conversation topic we're going to chat about today, for those inside and outside of Canada, is probably one of the hottest topics in Canada lately. And
that's great. Okay. Greg, can you hear us?
Yeah, and I have sound now, so this is great.
Yay! All right, excellent.
All right.
No, I do apologize for the delay, but we had trouble with my laptop computer, so we were using my son's partner's computer to get this all going.
Well, thank you.
And Greg, who's that good-looking guy behind you?
Well, yeah, some shameless plug.
So our time is in, so I'm going to get right to I'd like to welcome Greg Fergus, MPP for the Quebec riding of Hull-Aylmer. And he's also president of the Federal Black Caucus. Welcome, Greg, and thanks for taking time from the campaign trail to join us today.
It's a real pleasure to be there with you, Dr. Vibe. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
I appreciate it's not taken for granted. So, gentlemen, we got this thing going on in our country right now about blackface. The Prime Minister had some photos, some video, the background. I don't think it's you, Greg.
I don't think I had anything to do with this.
Okay, Robin, I'm going to keep you out to see if it's you. Hold on. It's Robin. Okay, so it's out of the way. So, Robin, it's for some reason it's yourself. So please come back in without the noise. It feels like you should be shaving with that old electric shaver sound.
Well, cell phones do everything nowadays.
Exactly. There you go. So that's happening.
Really?
Yeah. I'm gonna kick you out again, and I'll actually, I'm gonna just lock the room for a second, Robin, for about 2 or 3 minutes. So, Greg, you are a member of the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
And this has been quite a controversy right now. Let's get your thoughts on what has been going on during this quite heated conversation over the last few weeks.
Yeah, well, look, this is one of those situations where this was an action that obviously is hurtful. It reminds us of some other blackface controversies which have happened in the past. And I think there are two reasons why the Prime Minister has had a lot of forgiveness from the Black community. I think the first one is that it's happened a long time ago, and all of us live in glass houses. We don't want to throw any stones. We give people an opportunity to make mistakes and to grow. But the second thing is that, most importantly, is that Justin Trudeau has a very positive record with the Black community. Time and time again, before he became Prime Minister, and certainly since being Prime Minister, he has walked the talk with the community and making sure that he has been by our sides. He supported us on bringing Viola Desmond, the first woman to be on a Canadian banknote, as a Black woman. He adopted the decade of people of African descent. He was the first Prime Minister to recognize the scourge of anti-Black racism. And for 2 budgets in a row, federal budgets in a row, we've had measures, multi-million-dollar measures, which were directed at the Black community. So he has shown his good deeds and his good work for our Black community, and there's a lot more for us to do. But he has certainly a track record, and so people are able to look at this issue and to put it within a context and to move on. And we know that he wants to move on together with the Black community.
Okay. So we have Robin back. Something. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we'll just continue on. So what sort of feelings come in your mind in regards when you hear this term blackface? Like, regardless political realm, how does that make you feel that we're still dealing with the term blackface in today's society?
Yeah, well, I think it just really points out that we need to have a very long and extended conversation about systemic discrimination. We need to have a conversation about unconscious bias in this country, as well as in other places. This is not, we are not in a post-racial society yet, but I know that we can, we can find allies, and we can be working with ourselves and our community, making sure that we can move to a place where when people think of the Black community, they think of it in a very positive terms. We think of leaders in the economy, leaders in academia, leaders in culture, leaders in entertainment, leaders in so many different realms.
Okay, so I'm gonna now, since we've got everyone back, Doug and
Yes.
Robin, what are your thoughts? And Robin, you need to put those earphones in again because I'm getting that echoing again. So, Doug, why don't you take the lead? What is your thoughts on this whole blackface, and what does it make you feel like that we're still dealing with an issue like blackface today?
Well, yeah. So this was interesting. I guess the first observation that I have, being from the States, right? So when this came out, the premier mentioned brownface. I think that was the first comment that he made. And I thought that was interesting because I'd never heard that before. I never heard that term ever being used. It was typically in the States, it's been blackface, right? And so I had to kind of unpack that first. Okay, so they're applying the same principle to a different color, a different caricature, if you will, of another culture. And so that was interesting just because it was just the nomenclature of how we talk about these issues broadened my view of just how others were affected by this. But it also, I didn't have the same tinge. And I wonder if that was my own unconscious bias of how this affects other people other than people that happen to be Black. So that was the first kind of observation that I had. I started unpacking, why do I not feel that I would if this had been blackface? And then the pictures came out later that he had actually done blackface. And so I think we have to look at two things. One, what is the context? And what is the intent? Because the third piece, we could all agree that it's something that is obviously offensive to large groups of people, period. That's first. But secondarily, what was his intent? And then what's the context of that intent? If that intent was to try to get closer to someone, to try to identify with a culture, even within your own bias, you're trying to move the conversation forward and not in a negative sense. You have to kind of look at that as almost an admirable neurosis, so to speak, right? And so when you break it down and unpack it that way, you really have to look at the context. You can't look at things face value when there are things that are of face value that affect one another, right, in a negative sense. So there's a lot of psychology you got to unpack. I'm not a psychologist. I don't profess to be one, but I do understand. I try to look at content, the context of whatever content is out there. What's the context? And is there implicit or an implicit intent? And then I try to balance the bias that we all carry, just like Greg Fergus said, what's the intent and what are we trying to do? And we have to all accept that we are full of unconscious bias. And I think as a,
in this
as a
video,
group
also
of people, we have to break that out. And when you start unpacking that, that's where the conversation kind of can be moved forward, not just in response to someone's action, but to try to have empathy enough to say, let's have a conversation on why this occurred. And not just why, but how does it continue, right? So as a kid growing up in Tennessee, the home of the KKK, I get it, right? I get it at a high level, not just a book level. I know what that feels like. I know I've seen it, right? And so if at 6 years old, I knew as soon as I saw that image that that was something negative, how is it I'm age 51, how is someone else doesn't have that same perspective? And we just have to ask what is in our system that makes all of us biased and makes all of us carry these things that divide us.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Very well said. I'm going to see if we can get. So, Robin, Blackface. How does it sound is so bad? Yeah, Robin, unfortunately, I can't have you on. The sound is still really bad audio-wise. I don't know exactly what it is. So I just want to continue on. Greg, what are you hearing from Black Canadians in regards to this whole area of blackface, brownface, or how can I say how about melanated Canadians? Let me put it that way in regards to the blackface, brownface, and why, obviously this has incited some conversation. What are you hearing from them?
Before I go there, and I'm really happy to answer that question because I think there's some really interesting observations that I've had in hundreds of conversations across the country with Black Canadians. But I think Doug really raised an excellent point in terms of where are we all coming from, right? Doug quite poignantly pointed out, by coming from Kentucky, from the home place of the KKK, he has a very real street cred view as to what this means and what has happened. So I think that's really important to understand where each of us come, how we all come to this picture. And this leads into my answer to your question then, Dr. Vibe. It is, sorry, I'm just getting a little bit of feedback from Robin's screen, I think. Right on, perfect. In regard to, I think it leads into the question, as I was saying. So when I was speaking to folks, and from the very day that the moments that the Prime Minister had called me before the pictures were released, I tried to set up some calls with Black Canadians, networks of people I know across the country. And so we had a whole bunch of conversations on that night. And what was really interesting was that anybody 40 years and older in the Black community is saying exactly what I just said. Look, the guy has a track record. We know he's a real ally for diversity, especially to the Black community. We've seen worse. We can look beyond this. Just making sure that we do continue doing the good work for the Black community. For the under 30-year-olds, though, there was a really different reaction. They were really hurt. They hadn't seen this before, and they hadn't expected it. I don't think they have the same experience. Dr. Vibe, excuse me, Dr. Vibe, I'm going to assume that you're in the same age category as Doug and I. They don't have the same experiences that we've had. They haven't seen this or worse throughout, through their lives. We've really made big efforts as parents so that the next generation doesn't have to experience this kind of stuff. So this was their first exposure to it, and it affected them differently.
Doug, I see you nodding your head. I'll add to that.
Well, see, this is how you advance kind of the bigger piece of these arguments. I think, Greg has it right. If humbly, if I was, to recommend anything to the premier, it's that, look, this is the work. This is that space where unconscious bias affects all of us. It's not just Black people, it's not just brown people. This is, we're all living in this soup of unconscious bias. And to the extent that we can start breaking out the pieces of that soup, and identifying, okay, this is the carrots, this is the broth. You know, when we start unpacking those things, then we get to look at ourselves at whatever cultural level that is, whether that's you got to deal with, you know, white supremacy, and then I got to deal with, you know, intergenerational terror from my family, right? Or this family, or that group, or whatever it is that you're dealing with. India's going through some big time, same conversations intergenerationally in India.
Yeah.
The same conversations are being had on class and in different ways. So so as it relates to us, though, as it relates to Black folk specifically, I think the further and further we can push the conversation, when you start talking about speaking truth to power, I think we just need to live our truth. And the more we start living that truth, but in order to do that, we do have to understand the intergenerational intersections. And that's why I love my millennials. Like, they're just hardcore.
Yeah,
right. They're hardcore. They're hardcore on race. They don't play the racist thing. They don't play the subtle stereotypical things that we would laugh at in Generation X, and things that we would never say if you're a member of the silent generation, right? Or you're an older baby boomer. There's certain things you just don't tolerate, but then there's certain things that you tolerate that the young generation won't tolerate.
Yeah. Well,
you know,
I mean,
because there's one thing to have dogs sicked on you, to have water hose poured on you, to see houses and communities burned, to have parents who knew people who had been lynched, right? To look at these issues of brownface and blackface may be lesser importance to you, then, well, at least they're not putting the dogs on us, and at least they're not killing us, and at least we're not being hung, and at least, but then they are killing us because they're doing it in a different way, right? And so we just have to understand this us versus them, but we have to also first start intergenerationally.
Yeah, and also, if I could add to that again, Doug, I think you know, we're four guys here participating on this call, right? I mean, women have a different view. They see those kind of what kind of biases that we bring to it as guys.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm a heterosexual male, right? How do I? That brings its own views that my son, who is gay, will have a different view of how that all comes together, right?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting here, and before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge some people that are watching live on different platforms. We have Jeremy, we have Joyce, Bobby, Sylvia, BIA Media, Hillview Cam 3 on the Get Vocal platform. We've got some people on Periscope who I just want to acknowledge right now. Sean Osby and also U4Sight, who are based in the United States, who are checking out the conversation. So thank you so much. If anyone wants to join in via the Get Vocal platform, please type a message in the chat room and we'll get you on can. We hope that Richard can somehow resolve his technical issues. But one thing I've heard from both of you here, especially when it comes to the aspect of blackface and racism, is the intergenerational piece. And how do we as Black Canadians sort of make that gap reduced? Because Greg, you're saying you're hearing one message from one group and another message from another group. How do we get on this somewhat on the same page?
No, I think we're just losing you a little bit there, Dr. Vibe, at least on my computer. But
do you want me? I can repeat.
I think I got the gist of the question, which is the way to bridge that gap, I think, is that we need to have this kind of a conversation, right? This is where, you know, I speak to some reporters in the media, and I've been saying, you know, folks, don't focus on this incident. This is a small thing. What we need to start focusing is on the whole question that Doug brought up, is unconscious bias. You know, what unconscious biases do we have? How can we learn to talk to each other? How can we reveal that without people feeling very defensive? How do we talk about how that unconscious bias leads to systemic discrimination?
Doug?
Yeah, and I think this is the work that we have to do as agencies. When I look at the work the chamber's doing, and I look at, let's just come from a small business lens, right? How does this unconscious bias filter down into affecting people's quality of life, right? And so if someone's quality of life is affected by unconscious bias, how? Detail the steps. How does it get in the way? Because the people that are pushing the unconscious bias may happen to be white, but they also may happen to be black or brown or whatever culture. So if we can just say, look, at any given point, your quality of life is affected by unconscious bias. How do we take that out of the system? Right? The point in case, why is it that most of the black community don't join chambers of commerce? What is there fear? Is there mistrust? What's in the way of that? Right? And so to the extent that you said, well, we want our own, great. Every culture has its own things. That's what cultures do. They build things. They build agencies, they build infrastructures and ecosystems. And you can't expect, why is it that one ecosystem doesn't jive with another? Right? And so you have to kind of look at, how do these things affect supplier diversity? Right? I know the city of Toronto is trying to make some moves, and I know the great things that some of the other organizations here have been, kind of speaking truth to power and managing up. But at some point, you have to value the ecosystems around you, right? And to the extent that you ignore them, you're not valuing them. You don't give them value, right? And so I think oftentimes what we have to do is look at the little things that we can change that affect one person's quality of life will probably affect thousands. So let's look at those little things that we can do to affect unconscious bias. The problem is a lot of that work has to be done interculturally as well as bridging across cultures. But how do you judge if that work around unconscious bias is being done in other cultures? You can't. It's kind of hard to really look at another culture and say, okay, you're not doing enough of the good work because we're not seeing enough of the results. But how do they do that? Right? There's a lot of great people teaching today. There's a university that does this whole study around whiteness studies, which sounds crazy, right? It sounds odd, but but in order so that people who happen to be white or prescribe to that labeling, they are in need of unconscious bias training in a way that may be different than someone of African descent, because it depends on which colonizer colonized you, where you lived. So having this discussion around unconscious bias to someone who is from Ghana is much different than someone like me from Tennessee. It's a different conversation. And those are the conversations that need to be had. That's the only way we're going to be able to legitimately come back to our elected officials like Greg Ferguson and say, hey, here's some systemic things that we've broken down, and we know that there's bias layered in here, and here are ways to get around that. This is how the policy needs to be adjusted. It has to be that specific. Otherwise, I don't know how you change the conversation. I don't know how you elevate without breaking that down.
Okay. Good stuff. Well, Robin can't join us via camera, but he has a comment here on the side saying he feels there's if both of you can speak to this, the need for a national anti-racism strategy that includes an anti-Black racism component. He says the PM's revelations show that this issue of anti-Black racism is pervasive across the country, and we need to have work done at a systemic level to address it. So what are your gentlemen's thoughts about having a national anti-racism strategy that includes a anti-Black racism component?
Absolutely. And actually, that was one of the things what was announced in the last budget, that we were setting up a directorate, an anti-racism directorate. And the idea was to take a look at, of course, all different kinds and forms of racism. That's part of it. I think, I think Robin's point is bang on, and we need to even go further.
Well, my correction, that was given by Richard, not
Oh,
Robin. So my mistake. And I know both of them. So my apologies to both of them. Doug, what do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think that's, we've got to get to a place where both in the United States as well as here in Canada, that our leaders are okay with earmarking specific things for this overarching anti-racism of anything, right? But you have to have experts, you have to have people that are nuanced within the cultures. And it's got to be okay to earmark funding and resources for the Black community as it relates to those things, right? And they may be very applicable to other groups, but you do have to look at the places where you're having the disparity, right? And it could be, I think, looking at zip codes. Where is the disparity by zip code as well, right? And so you're zeroing in on the actual people who need the most resources. And because you have to have that level of equity. To me, that's not discriminatory, it's equitable. Right? And equality does not express itself without equity. I think equity allows equality to be itself.
Well, right? Doug, I think, again, you and I are singing from the same songbook, because I think what has happened is that a lot of people, I mean, we're seeing, you see this in your home country of the United States, and you're seeing this elsewhere. You're seeing a lot of people who feel that the pie can only be shared so many ways. But we've shown that over time that that's just not true. Women have been able to integrate into the workforce, and we've grown the pie, right? It didn't take anything away from men. And the same thing.
It added value. It's not added value to make the pie bigger. But my thing is, the people that are getting the smallest slices of the pie are the ones supplying 3/4 of the flour for this pie that we're talking about.
Yes,
right. We're the ones who.
Well put.
I could just, when I learned, that it was a Black slave who created the recipe for Jack Daniels. Wow. And you can see that time and time again, right? And unfortunately, I've seen it in my life. My father created the idea for the Sun Sphere, which is the icon of our community in Tennessee, right? You may have seen it on The Simpsons. Iconic, structure that still exists today that came about because of the World's Fair. His idea was the solar dome. So they stole the idea and called it the Sun Sphere. And so we're constantly innovating and creating all these beautiful things. And a lot of times because of, just superiority and just whatever, but whatever the reasons is, a lot of times it takes us 20 years after the fact or 80 years after the fact to find out these great histories. And so, that to me, that's unconscious bias. I'm better than you. Even if I steal your idea, I'm still better than you, right? And so those are things we have to unpack at the systematic level. Where do those things exist in the system? I think Census Canada is doing some great work moving forward. But, if you're looking at data on visible minorities, right, and you want to break that data down into a certain subgroup, hey, I want to see how many Vietnamese businesses there are. Mm-hmm. I'd like to know how many Black businesses are so I can do business with them, so I can connect my network to them. And to the extent that you can't get access to that data, shows some level of bias.
Well, absolutely.
It's just the way it is now. The great people that work there didn't create that.
Right.
That's where the push-pull. It's not their fault. But how do they change it from the inside when they may not have had their biases kind of looked at?
Yeah.
So they may be working their tails off to try to do great work, right? But yet the system is in their way, but they work in the system. So those are the things that we kind of have to hack, right? And break apart.
And so many activists in the Black community from across the country have been working on that file for a while. And it was only in 2018 that the federal government gave a commitment to disaggregate data that we collect at Statistics Canada, precisely to break down from what is captured in that large FISMIN, and really start taking a look, how does that affect the Black community? How does that affect other communities? And because we strongly suspect that when you start breaking it down, you realize that the group of the racialized Canadians that has it worst off are Indigenous Canadians, but we're number 2, and it's nothing to be proud about, but that's where we are, and so we need to have specific programs which address our community so that we can get out of that.
Right, but I do, from a positive standpoint, I think you're in a great place here in Canada. I do believe you have this fertile ground for a renaissance, because there is baggage you don't carry that we carry in the United States.
Well,
so many of the same arguments you're talking about today, Greg, are existent in the United States, and we've known better a little bit longer than you all, right? And so we're still repeating some of the same mistakes over and over. And so I think you guys have the luxury of being in a very open country, and a very country that's used to new people, new ideas, and new immigrants. And that to me is fertile ground for a renaissance in the Black community, to the extent that you can make some gains on the policy front to change things, to make things more equitable. And as you go on that journey and continue to do great things in that equity fight, I think Canada's just amazing place to get it done right, to do it right, to finally get it right.
Doug, I'm going to cut you because I know Greg wants to get something in. Our time is beginning to wind down. So Greg, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I'm reflecting also the comments that I've heard from members of the Black communities across the country. So Doug, I think, when we compare ourselves, I think you're right. But when we take a look at our own history within the context of our own history, I think it's also really important to point out that there are still some struggles, and some people have paid very much with their lives or with their careers or with their mental health, the effects of systemic discrimination and anti-Black racism. So I just want to make sure that I think Canada is a great country, and I think we have an ability to deal with this because we've seen experiences in other places. But I also want to recognize the fact that there are some challenges that we have here at the same time, and I don't want to minimize those.
Okay, as we begin to wind it down, I'm going to give some comments that have been given by Robin and Richard, the R&R connection, and we'll get some final words. Robin says the Blackface incident gets us talking about systemic discrimination. The challenge is to keep the conversation after the PM's Blackface is no longer in the news. And the bigger challenge is how to ensure these conversations lead to real systemic change in things like employment, the criminal justice system, and housing, for example. Then Richard adds, there has been a commitment to work with us, but we need to have our communities part of the design to ensure that we all are addressing the real issues. That's Richard. And then Robin adds on, there's been lots of talk about unconscious bias. However, systemic discrimination is about certain groups maintaining power and privilege over others. People don't give away their power and privilege, and they are completely aware of the bad things that they'll do to keep it the way it is. So with those last comments, and I know, Gemma, we're going to get some final comments from each one of you, and then we'll let you go. So first, Doug, I'd like to say thank you for stopping in today. I know you've got to run, but some final comments for yourself.
I love the last comments, and I'll say this. One of the things that the Canadian Black Chamber, as well as many others, BBPA, ACBN, and a lot of the other organizations that are kind of working in the small business space, we understand you have to practice co-opetition. Right?
I like that.
And so co-opetition is basically saying you create your own area and you compete within that area that you created that's suited for you. And so I think that's one of the things we're focused on is helping and partner with other agencies and help create an ecosystem where people can flourish and change their quality of life. To the extent that you can elevate people's quality of life who statistically or stereotypically are in one place, but you defy that one person at a time, one small business at a time. To the extent that you start doing that in relationship with the whole African diaspora and saying, look into your brothers and sisters to the South in the United States who are in the same boat, who definitely want to meet you, who definitely want to extend networks. That to me is the value proposition, and the to the extent that we can help create that kind of ecosystem and create that kind of output, then you begin, people have a reason to check their racism. They have a reason to check their bias, because they won't be able to do business with this beautiful thing that you built. Right? And so I think to the extent that we can grow businesses within Canada, I think that helps in that fight. It's not the only thing, but I think it's one of those fingers of the fist. You know, it's like housing and social justice and anti-Black racism specifically, all of those things. But I think entrepreneurship is one of those things that we can control, and we can wield a lot of might if we grow a huge entrepreneur community. And if people want to do business with you, they tend to figure out how to like you too, and how to do business with you and how to treat you.
Okay. And how can people find out more information about you or the chamber?
Yeah, simply go to blackchamber.ca, and there's a plethora of information. Reach out to any of our staff and any of the people, any of our board members. Andrea Barrett is the president. Michael Forrest is a founder of the Canadian Black Chamber, and they're growing chapters throughout the region. The first two will be in Ontario, here in Brampton and Peel region, and then one in Durham. So just go to the website, find out anything you want, blackchamber.ca.
Excellent. And Greg, again, thanks for taking the time. Some final words from yourself.
Well, look, I think, there are some people who don't want to share. And they're always going to be threatened by change. They were threatened by every change that's ever come on over the generations. But I think the vast majority of Canadians want to be Canadians free of bias, free of discrimination, free of racism. And I think we need to make sure that we create the environment for them to be part of that discussion, because we should use that desire. And this is why we need to have conversations like we're having here to keep that conversation going. The Prime Minister, I know, has made a commitment to keep that conversation going after the election. And he has a track record to prove that he did it during the time that he had when he was Prime Minister. So I have every reason to believe that he's going to do it afterwards. And I think that's a conversation that all Canadians need to be a part of, so we can build, as Doug sees it, that great leading country that we can be.
Excellent. And Greg, if people want to touch base with you, what's the best way?
Well, in this period, election period, you can catch me most times in front of people's doors, knocking away. But anyone can reach me if I'm so lucky to be reelected. You can reach me at greg.fergus@parle.gc.ca, or you can reach me at 613-992-7550. If I am not reelected, you could always reach me personally at greg@gregfergus.ca, and that's just the best place to reach me by there. And I'd be happy to if people can give me a bit of time, because I get a lot of emails. I don't have a staff who goes through it like they do on my parliamentary duties, but I certainly will get back to you.
Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for taking time from your positive, productive schedules to share with us today. I'm looking forward to having you back on again. You've been on individually, now together, and I'm looking forward to some more epic conversations with you. So have a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you again.
Be good.
Be well, gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Great to see you, Greg. Take care, Dr. Van.
Okay, folks, so we have finished the first part of our conversation, got over some technical challenges, and we already have the first person up for our next conversation. Jeremy, how we doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing excellent, Dr. Van. How about yourself?
I am blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. Just waiting to have our next your co-participant on this conversation chime in with us. So while we're waiting for that person to join in, can you just share a little bit of background about yourself?
So a little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario. Got into, I guess, social activism and stuff like that since 2016, mainly because I studied history in my undergrad, history and religion, and then went on to start my master's at the University of Victoria. So ever since kind of the 2016 election that actually happened in the States kind of got me into thinking, okay, well, how can I be a part of at least the conversation, the dialogue? And I've been trying to be a positive influence in that ever since through a variety of ways. I played basketball in university, so I've tried to give back to the community through coaching, taking time away from my day, helping out the youth upcoming in the Ottawa region as best I can, and through the mentors that have helped me to always kind of pass it on. That's kind of how I've been trying to pass it on to the future generation of the youth here.
Fantastic. And our co-person here is here with us. Oh, how can I introduce this man? I'll just do it what he told me to share. So AI is his senior is a JayZ fan, an Armchair sports enthusiast, over 40 years love affair with the NFL and social tension, and the social tension between us just playing the game and advancing the cause. He's a big fan of Jim Brown, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and of course, Muhammad Ali. So this means this is an OG with us, by the way. If you know what OG is, go to Google it. As for JayZ, well, he took the first and he got an asked for Beyonce's hand in marriage. Sorry. Yeah, plus he's a very smart man. Welcome. How are you, sir? And you are wearing your San Francisco hat. My goodness.
Hey, Dr. Vibe. Pleasure to be on your show. Can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear. See you loud and clear. And you've got all the paraphernalia. You got your Kareem Abdul-Jabbar book in the background.
Well, I'm honored to be on your show. Lots of folks get this opportunity, and I'm having it double because that handsome young man down there is somebody I know very well. What's up, Jeremy? And yes, I'm a big fan of the NFL, and every given Sunday, and football is on downstairs.
Well, there you go. And Robin says in the comment room, Eldon is a VOG. I know what a VOG is, but I ain't going to say it. So, gentlemen, we're going to have a little conversation today about, and it happened a little while back, but we haven't had a chance on a national Canadian platform, Black Canadian platform, to discuss this issue. So a little while back, most people know who JayZ is, entertainer, etc., signed an agreement with the NFL in regards to some business stuff like that, and a lot of people didn't like it. So I hear that both of you probably have some comments about that, and if anyone's on the Get Vocal platform, you can join in. But I'm going to ask Jeremy first. When you first heard about JayZ and the NFL partnering, what was your thought?
My first thought was surprise. I thought that JayZ, billionaire, Black billionaire, felt as though he was making a deal and compromising where I thought he should not have. So when I first heard the news that JayZ, I saw it through the interview online with him and Roger Goodell, who's the, I guess, the head person over at the NFL. I saw that and I was kind of like, this is not going to be a very simple task. One being as a lot of Americans, a lot of Canadians, people who watch the NFL, people who see Colin Kaepernick's reason for protesting against injustice, and then after see kind of JayZ coming in. And a lot of the perspective around that is that JayZ and Rock Nation are trying to kind of turn a profit over kind of the Black suffering that is in the United States. And I think that really brushed people the wrong way. And that's those are my initial thoughts on that. But we can get into more of how I've grown on the topic for sure.
Response?
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, that's one of this topic. This topic is really about how divided sometimes we can be, because I'm a big Kaepernick fan, always has been. And so the whole kneeling around the anthem in terms of protest of the anthem, just like JayZ and everybody else, we were down with that, and JayZ supported that. And so when I initially heard that JayZ had signed on with the NFL, I had a similar reaction to Jeremy, like, what? This doesn't make sense. And so I wasn't for it. And then the story, others start to pile on to it, and you start to think and reflect about how do we deal with these issues that are important social issues. Sometimes you don't necessarily know all the details. So I was more looking for more details to understand why my guy JayZ felt that this was something we need to do in order to advance the cause, even if it doesn't look that way on the surface. So I started to kind of look around and read and started to get a point of view. And so similar to Jeremy, this is where we are.
Jeremy, you said you wanted to wind down a little bit or go down a little bit deeper. Certainly, let's take it down a level. Let's drive it home. Come on.
Okay, so the first thing for me when I heard about the partnership, or kind of moving on to the partnership, and kind of what the background of people were saying. I am a millennial. I'm on Twitter. I'm on that stuff. So I read a lot of kind of the baseline heartbeat, the outrage, the mentions, all that kind of stuff. So I see a lot of people who are upset. One, because people seem to forget the initial cause or the initial reason why Colin Kaepernick was protesting was not protesting against the NFL, but protesting against mistreatment and social injustice issues in America. So now when we turn it to JayZ coming in and saying he's partnered with the NFL, him and Rock Nation, for different media outlets and stuff like that, it kind of brings around the point of, well, is this to promote Rock Nation, or is this to help promote and push the cause of social injustice issues? Because JayZ was right there with Colin Kaepernick, sure, at the onset, and calling out Travis Scott and different artists about performing at the Super Bowl. But then kind of now, 2019 or August, early August 2019, we hear about him partnering. It brings a lot of, I would say, mistrust and question as to why exactly he's doing it. Because when I watched the interview and JayZ's spin on it was kind of like, well, this isn't really to get Colin Kaepernick a job. It's to promote social injustice. But then after looking at his plan, I don't really see how him now being a part of the media or Rock Nation being a part of the media, how that necessarily promotes inclusion of Blacks, how it incorporates communities, police communities, how it has a really any effect besides what it looks like on the surface right now, which is JayZ's a billionaire trying to find a way to make more money, saw an opportunity to bank in because people will invest on knowing JayZ. He's been successful in most of his investments. So I personally felt the way about it as him trying to take advantage of the black dollar once again. So
I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. I mean, Jeremy, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're talking about, the surface, and a lot of the media and a lot of the conversation that came out. This is, JayZ has always been about the bag. So, why is anybody surprised? You can go all the way back to, Rockaway and all the kind of conversations with LL Cool J and a whole bunch of stuff. JayZ's got rap where it's about the bag. I'm not a businessman. I'm a business man. That's JayZ that most people know. And so that on the surface, that's where people go. But I think you've got to look at JayZ over his life, right? And I don't think someone who's invested so much to lead lead a lot of this stuff around the social issues for blacks in general would just dump all that because, as you were saying, black dollars. Easy to say that. I mean, so I've heard that too. I've heard the conversation with Dupree. The NFL was trying to get Dupree, and JayZ, was trying to talk Dupree and those guys from not being part of the Super Bowl last year. And so it was like a slap in the face. I mean, I hear all of that, but I think sometimes you got to go below the surface and not just, you've got to kind of take me when in doubt, where does the credibility? And I think JayZ's got credibility that we should kind of give it some time. The last thing I would say is that on a lot of these things, you've got to sometimes be in the room to make the change, right? And there's a lot of stuff in history where you can bang on the doors outside and protest and so on. Not that that's not important, but it's equally important to be in the house, in the room, talking to people, making deals, if you want to call it. It is about moving the needle. And if you're one person in the room talking with NFL owners and Roger Goodell about the issues and the plight or the concerns that NFL players have, I probably would want a guy like JayZ in talking about that, because he knows business. Yeah. He knows the language of business.
Yeah, I would agree with that mostly. But for the NFL, which is 75% black, black athletes, no black owners, a few black head coaches now, I could agree with you. You do want representation in the room. You do want, there is always kind of a two kind of pronged system whenever it comes to any protest. You do have to have the people on the ground who are marching, the people who are banging on the doors, as you say, Alvin, but you also do have to have the people who are signing legislation, who are vocalizing kind of what the people on the ground are saying to the higher ups. It just seems as though when I look at JayZ's kind of, let's say record, he has been doing a lot of assistance in some communities. But for this specifically, it looks as though,
Juliet,
although he is,
Juliet.
Keep on going, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Although he is assisting,
cut off.
Although he's assisting with, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. But although he is being partnered with, the NFL, I think that there is still a worry on the player side, as you see from guys who were part of the original protest, like Kenny Stills, Eric Reed, Colin Kaepernick. Even they've come out with some kind of skepticism of, is this for us or is this for JayZ? And I think until we have an unraveling of his plan, which is, this is what we have planned over the next couple months, this is what we have planned over the next couple years for Black and the youth, not just Rock Nation and different concerts we're going to be putting on. I think that's when we'll really be able to, judge or be able to take JayZ's comments from this past summer for face value once we see a plan unravel. Because as of right now, we are kind of still speculating. We don't really know what happened in the back room, what his plans are moving forward. But I think that there needs to be more on the table for all of us to be able to identify, to then be able to come up with a decision moving forward as to if it's positive or negative for the movement or for JayZ personally.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Just before we continue on, got a comment from Robin saying all the focus on JayZ distracts from the main issue, ongoing police brutality against Black folks. It also detracts from the larger issue of sports teams silencing athletes generally to render sports falsely non-political. But it is political because of the things like some NFL owners being major 45 contributors. I don't use the name of that. I just say 45.
Did you want to take it away, or did you want me to kind
of? No, you may just get the millennials. Because I know you're following a lot of that stuff. So go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think it does. I would agree with Robin's comment over here that it does distract. It does distract us from the main issue, which is the protests and the kneeling. And what I would have liked to see is if JayZ would have reached out or spoke directly with Colin Kaepernick before kind of going through and just making a unilateral decision saying, no, I'm going to be partnered with them. It would have been nice to see, hey, yeah, me, Eric Reed, Kenny Stills have talked about this. This is what we have coming up forward. They've agreed with my partnership, or we've had disagreements on my partnership, but this is kind of the best way that we see with moving the conversation forward with one, the nonviolent protest that happened during the anthems of most games. But also, and I just want to speak to that a little bit, because I often find that when I do speak to some of my American friends that I have below the border, a lot of them do speak to two different things of where the argument becomes. One, it becomes around it's disrespectful to protest the flag. They should want to be standing and show their patriotism and love for America. And the second thing is that you see a lot of the times, my brother personally, who serves in the Canadian military here, but for folks down in America, for their families who serve, they actually, most of the servicemen argue for people's right to protest, which is their First Amendment right down south. And they think that people should have that right to protest. So there also is kind of the infighting there between people who think that it's against America to do what they're doing, to not stand for the flag, but also people who are saying that no, it's definitely within your rights. And for the NFL to come down and say you cannot do this, or there's fines attributed to this, I think it does silence the rights, kind of to what Robin's comment was. I think it does silence the rights of the players, and it'll create further inaction on the overall movement that they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, though, these things are part of a larger thing. JayZ is one part, and it's more public in the optics of it. I can tell you right now, even within the NFL, even when Colin and Eric Reed and other folks were talking and speaking out on this, majority of NFL players weren't kneeling. Right? That's the whole point of a divided country. And you mentioned some of that in terms of, the flag and what it means to kneel, and some of that's gotten lost in terms of what Colin was trying to do. I think the challenge, though, and I consider it a good kind of challenge, is the more people talk and press against what we're watching JayZ, the more now it's almost like you've got JayZ, whatever his intention might have been, right? Or you want to kind of ascribe a view to his intentions. Now he's got, 30 million eyeballs, black eyeballs plus, on him to see what exactly does he do with the Inspire Change work? What exactly does he do as it relates to the broader kind of issues? What other stance he takes? So, I'm one who thinks that you need many tools to kind of affect the big, broader issues around discrimination, systemic racism, and all the sorts of things that's been kind of impaling us for centuries. But we don't want to put all of it on any one person, even if that person is JayZ.
Okay. I have a question here from Richard asking, was it JayZ's accountability to the Black community as a billionaire? What is JayZ's accountability to the Black community as a billionaire doing business with the NFL, who tries to silence Black athletes?
I could go on that, because this stuff comes up when I talk about when me and the old guys talk about sports and what's a GOAT, who's a GOAT, LeBron a GOAT, is Muhammad Ali the GOAT, and that kind of stuff, right? So when we focus in just on the money, then it's an easy, who's got the most money? So we say it's a billionaire, right? If you look at basketball stats, who's got the most rings? That's the GOAT. But in our community, that's just part of it. So JayZ's billionaire dollars don't make him kind of anything in a way. What kind of gives him that? I mean, with the addition of, marrying the most beautiful artist, that sort of stuff, Beyonce. I mean, that'll do it every day. But it's his social work. It's as much his social work that makes it matter to folks. There's a lot of people that's got billions, or certainly close to that. JayZ's particular situation, and for me, when we're talking about why we're talking about it so much, is because, yes, he's got oodles of money. He's from the projects. It's a good American story of, hood dude, made it well, but to $1 billion worth of wealth. But in terms of GOAT, to where we kind of look to him to kind of carry the whole bag around the social issue, I think that we've got to kind of check ourselves on that. He's got creds because of his money, for sure, shrewd businessman, but it is his social activism, his position on stuff, the way how he kind of moved into the Brooklyn Nets, got 2%, sold that, cashed in, and now this big move, NFL, that we're going to watch to see how does he turn that business deal to a kind of a social teaching, coming together point for the advancement or the betterment of Black Americans and for that matter, Blacks in lots of other places. So that's how I see it.
Jeremy?
Now, the one thing, so I would agree with most of what we just said there. The one thing I would want to see more of in a lot of JayZ's upcoming decision making, and sometimes public perception of when something comes out often can, when people don't release things the way that the public wants it to be, it could be immediately dismissed. So maybe the initial reaction to JayZ's partnership is seen as, why is he doing that? It doesn't help us. So I do agree with Alden when he says that we do need to see an outline of the plan to see where he's moving forward with his social, with the social plan and how he's going to help social and systemic racial problems in the United States. I just wish more of that would have been outlined. This is my plan. This is what I think we have to do moving forward. And him as a multi-millionaire, billionaire who has a lot of money, in America, money is influence. So if you can get your message out as often as possible by ads, all that kind of stuff, if he starts using that to then promote, hey, this is what's happening in this city, this is what's happening in that city, this is how we can organize as a community to move forward, try to have different plans to include police officers in communities. Because when people oftentimes see the police, there's this kind of like, oh, make sure I'm not doing anything wrong, rather than a feeling of they're there to help me, which is what they are here to do. I have family members in policing as well, who I know they go out every day on their job and they're here to help the community. And I think that if what JayZ is planning on doing on the branding, I think he could brand it a lot better to help transition the community from quote unquote fear to more of an acceptance and willingness to be able to say, oh yeah, that's Constable Smith who's here. Yeah, he's here all the time. He's always looking after us, and have more of that conversation. But I just don't see that quite yet. So it might still need to be unraveled. But I do think that if that's the way he's looking to go, then it could overall be a positive effect. But if it starts turning into JayZ's just trying to become the first Black owner so that he can do this and that, then that's where I kind of feel like I pull back a little bit more in that case.
Yeah, and I think we gotta be skeptical for sure. But I mean, nobody lays out all of their steps. He's not a politician, right? And from where those guys come from, the culture, snitches get stitches. You do not talk your game. You're live men, not for fresh men. Right? That's the kind of culture. So I would be shocked if JayZ, it kind of comes out and talk in the way that kind of makes it, because we got to understand there's also a counterpiece to everything that we try to do. Right? So this whole notion about, he need to come out and put out the 12-point plan. He's not a politician, right? He's a businessman. He's got a track record. Give him some space. He's going to just watch him. And I mean, you can always follow up and do all that sorts of stuff, but I just don't think he's going to come out and kind of go, guys, here's my plan. I mean, I wish he would do that, but right away, now he's on Fox News. Now he's on everywhere else. Everybody's dissecting it. People now putting up speed bumps and, roadblocks in the way. I don't think it's a talking thing. I think like what he's done for his entire kind of life, the guy has stood up. He stepped up. Most of his moves have worked. this is an unusual move. I agree with Jeremy that, on the surface or at the beginning, it's like, I'm a big Colin Kaepernick fan. But, on this, you got to get in the house to burn the house sometimes, to change the house, to move around the furniture sometimes. And I think JayZ's down with that.
It's interesting that many people commented me on this story and said, he ain't going to get in no house because he's not going to be at the table. Because he's going to be an outsider. He's a business associate. He's not going to be at the table. That's what a lot of people are telling me, that it's all semantics. And how much power does he really have when all the ownership is non-melanated? And you look at their actions.
Got to be in the house, Dr. Vibe. You got to be in the house. You might be in the house in the closet. You might be in the house.
I know.
Sitting at a side table. But you got to be in that billionaire house.
I hear you, but let's hope history doesn't repeat itself.
Yeah, true that.
That's the concern. Robin has a conversation topic here, says this also distracts from the largest systemic issue of prison preschool to pigskin pipeline that streams Black males towards sport and away from intellectual endeavors. This is reinforced by underfunding schools in Black neighborhoods and promoting the dream of making the NFL, which is only a little more likely than winning the lottery for your average young brother.
You got to get Robin on here.
Well, he has audio difficulties, so he's doing his commentary through the chat room. Anyone want to respond to that at all?
Well, for sure. So when looking at kind of the ways out, when I say ways out, I mean ways out of the neighborhood or ways out of impoverished areas. People look to hitting that home run. So for people, it's either the music industry or it's professional sports. In this case, we're talking about football, but it could be basketball, other sports. And a lot of that comes out of a lot of these stories we hear is one person in the neighborhood was able to make it out. And I think it becomes difficult when people don't, or America doesn't sell the dream of, hey, go to high school, get good grades, get a good university, go to a good university, you'll get a good job, and then after help make your friends out. People think, hey, I can make the NFL right out of college, university, get in, make a couple $1 million, take my family out. It's more of, not to say professional athletes don't put more than the same effort in the classroom. That's not really where I'm going with that at all. It's more to just say that they might see it as, hey, this is the way that I can make the most amount of money the quickest. Well, not the quickest because it's obviously where they grew up, but and versus going through the whole go $50,000 in debt through university, try to get a job through difficult job markets, etc. But I would agree. Part of the problem is underfunding public schools. There has to be a way more money putting into public schools, and the outcomes of public schools, getting people to the schools, different kind of problems that come around that, because that's more of a that becomes a very, very big problem, because then you're talking about funding for meal plans, funding for get the kids to school, funding at the schools, make sure you're getting the right teachers, making sure you're paying the teachers the right amount. So that becomes a way bigger problem. But I would agree that is a huge problem that does have to be dealt with, of course.
Anything you want to add on to that, sir?
I agree.
Colin.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Oh, my buddy Jeremy finally cracked up. Hey, this is bending into politics right there. Your answer was like on politics, Jeremy. I just want to let you know I'm marking that, underfunded public schools and all that sorts of stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is a big issue. Like I said before, the football piece kind of and the controversy around the kneeling is underneath all of that is a lot of bigger issues. Why football players, why athletes seem like the only way out is through sports. It's a long conversation, especially when you add to that the NFL is probably the only sports where your career can end on the first play. There's no guarantee money, no matter how much big the contracts are. You can get cut and just all that $50 million for 5 years has gone down the drain. It's one of the the only sports to me where the athletes are so close to like on the plantation. So I get it. I think from this point of view, though, it's more the reason why you need 10 JayZs.
Okay. Point well taken. I always remember there was an old-time football coach named Bum Phillips in the NFL. And when his and when he said, if you don't play good for his team, the NFL stands for not for long.
Yeah.
So
I remember that.
Yes, just to continue on here, Robin saying a U.S. high school baller has a 0.03% chance of making the NBA, whereas much higher chance of becoming, for example, a computer programmer. But black males are streamed away from these options like that. Understood. In the last few minutes we have in this conversation, I know, Eldon, you had another topic, and I know that if you introduce it, Jemery will certainly tag along with you. You wanted to talk about why so many blacks are supporting Bernie and Biden. Why did you want to talk about that today?
Well, listen, it's because that handsome young man down there is always kind of pushing me on this topic. And I'll say it's the whole idea of how divided we are. It's really the point in the Colin Kaepernick. JayZ was just one layer. Your previous conversation on Blackface is in a kind of way was like that. You know, the community is a bit divided. And this one on politics, certainly in the U.S., the big challenge that folks have is Biden has got like 90% of the black vote through these primaries. All right. And yet we have two black candidates in Kamala Harris, right, and Cory Booker. Nowhere to be found. Of course, Jeremy talks about Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. So the conversation we're having and folks have been having is, how is it that you can just park votes, black people votes, for granted with the establishment guy? So I'll turn it to Jeremy to kind of, because he was really pushing since the last time. You know, I think you might probably went down. I don't know if you went down to the States and got your hands dirty in the Bernie, burn. But chime in, Jeremy.
Well, the first thing in terms of support, and it kind of overlaps a little bit with our conversation on the NFL and kind of how can a guy like Joe Biden kind of take advantage of the black vote. Obviously, Joe Biden, vice president to Barack Obama, first black president of the United States. So a lot of what Joe Biden is receiving or a lot of his early polling results is kind of counting a lot of the support from blacks. And I find oftentimes that when reviewing kind of policies and then after, like, I'll just say that reviewing policies and then after looking at them on how they affect blacks, they seem to want to, or they seem to often be tricked into voting for something that might not necessarily benefit them, or voting for a person that might not necessarily benefit them. Joe Biden's infamously known for passing the 94 crime bill, which a lot of people would say caused a lot of blacks to be in jail for longer prison sentences. Caused this is something that Bill Clinton apologized for, and something that he still gets a lot of backlash for. Joe Biden, I'm speaking about now. And I think that for somebody who would vote for something like that and the backlash that came along with it, it's super surprising to see why blacks would be so quickly to rush up to support him. In all fairness to Joe Biden, is that Obama didn't have the black vote until I think Super Tuesday. So they went into Iowa, New Hampshire, early primary states. And then after, once he kind of ticked those off, he then got the black support. But it seems like inherently people are just giving Joe Biden the black vote. And I'm not sure why. For someone who follows it relatively often, I'd say on a daily basis, I kind of check in and see what the news is about. So that's super surprising to me, at least in that terms. So,
yeah, I mean, I hear it. I think, the idea of blacks overwhelmingly supporting Joe Biden has to do with Obama, and also has to do with pragmatism. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but most of what these guys tend to vote with is the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. And the big reaction right now to who can best beat what Dr. Vibe just said,
the man who should not be named.
I'm going to name him, President Trump. The whole point around that stuff is when black folks look at it, they kind of look at it in a much more concrete, pragmatic. I'm not saying rightly or wrong, but the history is the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, and who they think can beat. And Joe Biden may have had the kinds of records that are questionable and all the sorts of things, but at the end of the day, they look around and they feel very worried that if they put all their eggs in someone else, and then they get up against that guy, that we got another 4 years. So I think it's as basic as that. I wish we'd find more courage. I wish because I don't really believe in that, but I think, Biden is kind of playing that up as the true tested. I was there for you. It's all a big challenge of, choosing between two good white guys, right? That's again, another deeper conversation, even within the Canadian political construct, right? So, but when we have a person, like we have two people of color, we have people who have much more of a social record, Bernie on blacks, going way back to Martin Luther King, and all that sorts of stuff. But yet he doesn't get a look that way. Yeah, that is problematic. But I think the answer is not really as sinister. It's twofold. Folks are generally more pragmatic about who can beat that guy, whoever that guy is on the other side. And in Biden's case, he was also the vice president of, some of us say, our greatest president, right, in Obama. And so he has the leg up. 90%, will it stay? I hope they look around and look at some of the other candidates, but that's my view as to why it's that way.
Anything you want to add, Jeremy, on what was just said?
Yeah, just a little bit more on the topic, just because I'm not a Joe Biden supporter at all. If I were to choose kind of any of the people that are blue, but I do think that a lot of his support right now is kind of soft support. When we go through kind of the polling and once the votes actually are cast in the new year, that he will lose kind of a lot of that momentum, and his overall battle, if it's to be the person who's going to represent the Democrats there against Trump, I think that's more of a difficult battle to win than it would be for a person like Bernie Sanders. Although they both do beat Trump in a lot of polls head to head, I do think that kind of the Rust Belt states or states that have a lot of workers, blue collar workers, would lean more heavily towards someone who supports and's been on the ground fighting for union representation for them, like Bernie Sanders, versus somebody like Joe Biden, who says that he's for union workers, but then after will take money from people who are actually trying to stop unions from forming. So just the discrepancy in kind of what he says versus his actual actions. And for kind of the black support that Bernie, I feel like, doesn't get enough of. He does have decent representation in people who are running his campaign, like Senator Nina Turner, who used to be former senator, who is an absolute beautiful voice on the campaign trail and someone who speaks truth to power every time that she can. Is a very good black voice that promotes inclusion and promotes kind of Bernie's message, which is everybody kind of coming together and starting a social revolution together, people over kind of that 1% that has all the control or most of the control in America and in the world, Canada included. Those would kind of be my thoughts on kind of the next step for what would be happening down there.
Well, we're going to start winding it down. Some more comments from Robin, who's firing on the keyboard these days. He said, we just spent an hour talking about U.S. issues in the middle of a Canadian federal election. We should talk about who black votes should vote for on October 21st. We are going to get to that. Don't worry. Still got some time. As that election, as October 21st becomes closer, we will be hosting some conversations about that here. He then he said his prediction is, like the 45 election, people will vote out of fear. That means Maxime Bernier's People's Party will do way better than folks think. Right-leaning NDPs afraid of Jagmeet will do, and what he will do with the party, will vote Liberal. The PC will thus be split, and the Liberals will swell to majority. We will hold you to that. I'm going to copy and paste that for future reference. So that's the first.
That's an entire show all to itself, right there.
So he's given us a conversation topic for prediction wise. Yeah, all right.
I did want to. Sorry.
Oh, Richard has one thing. Richard is saying, I think blacks in the U.S. are being strategic about their support for the demographic. I think he's maybe say democratic, not demographic nominee.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, possibly. I wanted to ask Dr. Vibe, Jeremy, since you talk about millennials, because when they're talking about the number of folks who are blacks who are supporting Joe Biden, are you seeing or feeling that the younger blacks are supporting Biden as strong as that? I don't think so. And it's still about their participation number going up. That is
exactly
that will make it so.
Yeah, so a lot of his support, poll tested support, comes through older people, 50, 65 plus, is where support comes from. A lot of actually, even when he was going up against Hillary Clinton back in 2015 to the 2016 election, Bernie's his age range from 18 to 36 among blacks outbeats almost everybody in the race. He's finding a way to connect directly with them. He's sharing a message directly with them that can directly support them through a lot of systemic problems that are in the United States, like the high school to prison pipeline, stuff like that. So he's reducing problems such as like marijuana use, which we legalize here in Canada. But trying to decriminalize that to help those who have any violent crimes get out of prison. But to echo more what I think you were trying to get at, which is how do you get the blacks to vote? Although the older black voters, for sure they're supporting somebody like Joe Biden. How do we get the new younger people who are saying they're pro Bernie and will come out on the polls? How do we get them out to the actual poll lines to wait in line to then cast their vote? And I think that is by not selling them, but giving them something that they could directly benefit from. Such things as canceling student debt, all of it, not partial of it, like Elizabeth Warren would be for, completely reducing medical debt, which is something that Bernie's for, that no other candidate's for as well. And helping really to invest in tuition-free trade schools for those who aren't going to be going to university, because oftentimes we focus just on university graduates do this or university graduates do this, but we still have very good solid careers that happen in college, happen in trade schools that younger blacks can benefit from, and that a community as a whole can benefit from, which I think that people are seeing as policies and beyond what kind of the mainstream media is telling them, which is great that we have your show here, Dr. Vibe, to kind of give out the information to everybody, independent media. Is really a message that they can kind of connect with, and then actually see, okay, well, this is why I have to go out. This is why I have to support. My mom had all these surgeries now. I have to drop out of college. I got to go work. These are all the problems that kind of people are dealing with, white and black. But we've seen that it disproportionately affects black people currently in the United States. So those are kind of the policies that he's supporting, are reasons that I personally think, and what I've seen kind of online, of why people would be willing to kind of wait in line, get out there, and go out to vote. So that's what I've personally been seeing.
Okay. Any final words from either one of you gentlemen before we wind it out?
Hey, no, I think a lot of what Jeremy's saying I agree with. And it applies to here in Canada as well in the election that's coming up. Where young people go, how active and how engaged they get, goes a long way in terms of determining the election results. it's always a challenge when you look in the percentage, older, various demographics that young folks like Jeremy. I mean, I in my closing comments, I want to kind of acknowledge that Jeremy's probably one of the youngish kind of people I know who is can get a PhD on this political stuff, both in terms of the U.S. and Canada. And so we'll have to get you hooked up with Robin in terms of where the Canadian vibe is going the next time. So no, if this is great, and Dr. Vibe as usual, you looking sharp. A problem for miracles, a solution for miracles.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, in closing, I appreciate the opportunity to be kind of on your show here, Dr. Vibe. It's been a great conversation, one I think that we need to continue to have, and also evolve on our conversation as well. As where we are now won't necessarily be where we're going to be in the next 10 years, but we'll just still be progressing the same step forward, which is how do we get to the next step, and get there collectively.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank everyone who chimed in during any part of the conversation. I'll just shout out some people right now on the Get Vocal platform. We have Jim, Audia, Richard, Bobby, Robin. Robin, you got to be on camera properly next time, by the way. Joyce, Greg, Sylvia, BIA Media, Hillview Cam 3. Had some people on other platforms such as Sean Osby and who else? Yeah, Sean Osby from the United States, New Media Radio from the US. So I had a number of people from both sides of the border checking out this epic conversation. So I'd like to say again, thanks to everyone for watching. As always, I'll have to make a big shout out. Can't forget them. So I just bring them up right now to the Dream Legacy Foundation. They're leading and partnering with other social and private partners to build and strengthen Black Canadians in infrastructure in various areas. One of the organization's guiding principles is it's simply our turn to pay it forward. It is a Black-led and managed not-for-profit foundation that is independent and philanthropic. I can't say that word, so I'm not going to try again. Arm of a national Black corporate entity, Dreammakers Inc. As always, I'd like to thank everyone for dropping by. And this is how we end off all the conversations, all the epic conversations I host. First of all, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions. And finally, aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Thanks, everyone. Follow myself, Dr. Vibe, at the Dr. Vibe Show to keep up with upcoming conversations with ourselves and the organizations of this wonderful country. God bless. Peace to all. Keep the faith. Goodbye.